Hello guys, welcome back. Today we will discuss about routing with React Router in this training series. We will be covering what is React Router, how to define the routes in React, how to handle the routes, how to pass the parameters in already handled routes, nesting of the routes, as well as we will also talk about code splitting, which is also known as lazy loading. React routing is basically allows to develop a single page application. In single page application, we render a website that re-renders its content in response to navigate the actions. And it does not make the same request to the server to fetch the new HTML again. Single page application introduce some features where we navigate through the actions such as clicking a link, but at the same moment the page will not re-render again and again. Only the contents will be partially viewed onto the same page, or a home link or a home route as well. React routing allows us to develop such single page applications where the browser should change the URL when you navigate or click over a link, but page will not reload again. In this case, the application will construct or reconstruct the same view with the re-rendering rather than navigating from one page to another page. In React routing, we basically require three packages which are compressed into one npm installation, which is React Router DOM. In this React Router DOM package, we have three further implementations respect to the requirement. React Router DOM is basically a version of React Router v4 for the web application that is further divided into three categories: React Router DOM, and React Router Native. React Router is basically consists some common core components that allows us to communicate between DOM and native versions for core routing components. React Router DOM comprises the routing API for the browsers or web applications, and the React Router Native comprises of routing API for React Native mobile applications. Basically, React Router hosts some core components for routing in React application. For that purpose, we need to install the React Router DOM. And to enable this React routing, we require this package to be installed in our application using npm. Further that, we need to understand how to install this package. I already have this React application where I have this app.js where I'm simply rendering h2 routing example. To enable the routing in this application, we require the React Router DOM package. We will simply run the command to install the package React Router DOM. To keep this dependency in package.jsn, we require save flag as well. So whenever you install any component or a package using save flag, it keeps the entry of that dependency in your package.json for further implementation. Tomorrow, if you wish to delete the node modules and keep the dependencies again in the project folder, you can use the dependencies object from package.json. Once this React Router DOM is successfully executed or installed in our application, we need to run our application once. I just would like to show you what is the output as of now we have in this app.js or app component. Further that, how we can configure the routes. Configuring the routings in React application is actually implementing or enabling the single page application or vice versa. Because until you are not configuring the routes in your application, you could not create a single page application. To enable the routes in our application, as of now I am having this app component. I am supposed to create three components, stateless components in the same file. One stateless component is with the name of home, another stateless component with the name of about, and the third stateless component with the name of contact. In this home component, I am simply rendering a message home page. In about component, I am simply rendering about page. Respectively, in contact component, I am simply rendering contact page. Afterwards, I just need to go to this app component and I need to enable the routes. So I am going to remove this div which is simply rendering the routing example in H2 heading. To enable the routings in your application, you require the further implementation of the React router type or a category. In React router, we have the further categories to enable the routes. The first is browser router and the second is hash router. Browser router uses the HTML5 history API to render the component. If you are using a dynamic server that handles the dynamic URL, then you need to use the browser router component. In browser router component, we write a URL like the domain name followed by the route name. Second is the hash router. In hash router, it uses the hash in the URL to render the output or a component. If you are using a server that only serves the static files, then hash router component is what to be used in this case. In hash router, the URL looks like the domain name followed by hash and then followed by the route. In React router components, as discussed, three components required when working with the React router. Browser router, which is usually aliased as a router that wraps all your routes in the component. The second is a link component that are used to generate the links to your routes or the navigations as well. And the third is a route, which is most important component that takes many properties inside it. These components are responsible for showing or hiding the components, what they contain. So, in our application, we will prefer the browser router in the first case, where we first need to import, as we already install the package React Router DOM. Out of that React Router DOM, we want a browser router category. We will give a alias name to this browser router as router. So whenever we are using router, it means we are implementing the browser router. Afterwards, in our app component, which is a stateful component already, we will configure the router, browser router. Inside that, we will define some routes. We will create the first route component. We will keep them self-enclosed. We further have some properties of the route component while defining the routes. The first property is the URL, the second is the path, the third is the exact, and the fourth is the params, depending upon the requirement. So first we need to define the path. With the name of that, the route name has to be decided. So I suggest to create the first route with the path slash. It means when my application will render for the very first time, this route will be rendered. Afterwards, We just need to render the component that by default has to be rendered when I run my application. We have three components in this same file: home, about, and contact. You can also keep them separated in different files when they have a lot of rendering component in that. I would like to render the default home component when my application runs by default. The second render which I want is when someone will look for the route / home, then which component has to be rendered is about. Post that, we also have one more component which is contact. This has to be home. In the second case, when I look forward for about route, then the about component has to be rendered, that we have created just before this app component. And the third route is the contact route. So when someone will look for the contact route, the contact component will be rendered. It is simply saying that route is not defined in our imports. Route component exists in the same package React Router DOM but /route, and just you need to import the route component never to be wrapped inside the curly braces. So we will simply write down the route from React Router DOM. Just simply save this and render this over your React application. You can see that by default the home component is rendering, where the home page gets returned from the JSX. When you will look for the about, it will render the about page, but you can see that it is also rendering the JSX that returns from the home component. And simply when you say contact rather than about, it will render home, which is a default route, along with the contact page. In this case, what you have to do is, in the route component, as I discussed, we have further many properties to be associated. The first property is the path property. The path property is of type string always. It holds the name of the path to be matched when my application gets rendered with this. The second property is the render. You can also replace it with the component that holds the name of the component to be rendered if there is a match with this path. And the third property which we need to write down now is the exact. The exact property tells the route to be executely match the path as an inclusive and exclusive routing. So this home component will be only rendered when the exact / means default route has to be matched. So now you can see that if I am rendering the contact, only the contact page JSX gets returned. If I am writing the about JSX gets returned, or the component return the HTML with JSX. And when I'm not writing anything, the home component gets rendered. And when I'm simply writing the home, also the home component gets rendered. This is how the router component works in our routing configuration in React, where we further need to be implement with so many things, passing out the parameters, working with some match, working with some implementations of the properties along with the route, and so many further things to be implemented in our upcoming series. Until next time, stay tuned. Thank you so much, guys.